A fetish is never random. It is not a strange preference that appears without context, nor is it simply what someone likes. In depth psychology, a fetish is a symbolic solution. It is the psyche's way of encoding emotional experiences that were too overwhelming to process directly. A fetish transforms something confusing, frightening, or deeply emotional into something structured, predictable, and controllable. The object of the fetish is not the point. The meaning behind it is. A fetish often begins in moments the conscious mind has long forgotten. Not dramatic moments, small ones, subtle ones. A child might feel an intense mixture of admiration and fear while watching an adult fasten their shoes, straighten a glove, adjust a belt. The child cannot understand the emotional charge, but the body remembers. Later, that same gesture becomes eroticized, not because the gesture itself is sexual, but because it carries the emotional temperature of that early moment. The fetish is therefore not about sex, it is about memory and emotion disguised inside arousal. Take, for example, someone with a fetish for polished leather shoes. To an outsider, it seems arbitrary or even comical, but perhaps the child once felt powerless in front of a parent whose presence was both protective and intimidating. The shoes were at eye level. The shine, the smell, the firmness. They became the symbol of that mixture of admiration and fear. In adulthood, the person may feel desire in the presence of those shoes because the psyche is returning to a familiar emotional landscape, one it can now explore without danger. The fetish turns helplessness into excitement, distance into contact, fear into intensity. Another example, a person develops a fetish for stockings or silk, not because the fabric is inherently erotic, but because at some point in childhood, silk was present during a moment of tenderness or attention. Perhaps the child brushed against a parent's clothing while being held. The softness became fused with safety, closeness, and warmth. In adulthood, the silk is no longer just fabric. It is the embodied memory of being held. The fetish becomes a bridge to an emotional experience that the person longs for but cannot articulate. Or consider someone drawn to power dynamics through fetishistic imagery, a strict voice, a specific outfit, a gesture of authority. These too may originate in childhood interactions with figures who were feared, admired, or deeply present. The fetish becomes a way to revisit that emotional tension, this time with agency. What was once overwhelming can now be shaped, directed, and chosen. In this sense, the fetish is not a deviation from normalcy. It is an unconscious attempt to repair or reorganize emotional experience. A fetish often emerges in people who learned early that direct emotional closeness is unpredictable or unreliable. The fetish provides a stable path toward arousal, one that requires no vulnerability. A person might feel safer becoming aroused through a ritualized object than through intimate emotional exchange. The fetish is emotionally efficient, predictable, consistent, controllable. It protects the psyche from the chaos of connection by offering a focus that never disappoints. The object does not change, does not reject, does not demand, it simply responds. Yet the fetish can also expose truths about the inner world. For some, the fetish represents a part of themselves they were never allowed to express. A person raised in a rigid or emotionally cold environment might develop a fetish that symbolizes rebellion, freedom, or sensuality. Another who grew up with unpredictability may develop a fetish that allows them to choreograph emotional intensity with precision. The fetish is not pathological. It is the psyche expressing something true in the only safe language available at the time, but a fetish can also carry unresolved grief. Imagine someone who has a fetish for objects associated with caretaking, medical gloves, aprons, or uniforms. Beneath the erotic surface might lie a longing for caretaking that was never fully received. The fetish allows them to feel attended to, yet keeps the emotional distance that real vulnerability would require. The desire becomes a coded plea. Stay with me, but don't get too close. Ooh. Fetishes may appear exotic, but their psychological logic is simple. They transform emotional complexity into erotic clarity. They are the psyche's attempt to take something unmanageable and make it accessible. Yet the goal of understanding a fetish is not to erase it. The fetish does not need to vanish to be integrated. Instead, understanding reveals the emotional threads woven into desire. The person begins to sense why this object, why this gesture, why this detail carries such power. When the meaning behind the fetish becomes conscious, something shifts. The fetish loses its rigidity. It becomes a choice rather than a compulsion. Desire becomes more spacious. Intimacy becomes less threatening. The person can explore sexuality in broader ways without losing the symbolic richness of their fetish. A fetish is not a flaw. It is a story encoded in the body. It is the whisper of an older emotional truth, resurfacing in a form the psyche can bear. And when you understand that truth, you do not lose the fetish. You gain the freedom to relate to it in a way that reflects who you are now, not who you had to be when it was formed.